I am thrilled tonight to join you here on The Warning with two men I admire a great deal. We have Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove, Minister Jonathan, with us, and of course, we have Bishop William Barber. And both of these men are new to Substack, where they are spreading a gospel of not just the good Lord's teachings, but of Americanism. And we're going to talk about that. One of the things that I've been dealing with is I took my 80-year-old mother to the Normandy landing beaches, which is something that she wanted to see. A few weeks before, I had the great privilege in Jackson, Mississippi, to stand in the driveway on the spot where Medgar Evers was gunned down. He was a Normandy veteran. I was at the spot where Medgar Evers would have come ashore, where he would have begun his duty and his journey. And I have been dealing with an incandescent anger as I walked amongst the gravestones, the betrayal of American values and ideals. And I know that anger is not healthy. And I know that anger is not productive. But I know my anger about what is happening is very real. And so I couldn't think about two better people to talk about three things before we talk about registering millions of voters. I'd like to talk about anger because there's a lot of angry people in America angry about what's happening, and I'm one of them. I'd like to talk about doubt. It doesn't seem like men like Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill and Martin Luther King ever dealt with doubt. But the record shows they all had crises of faith and they all doubted. And we look at them as lions who were strong when everybody else wavered. But it's more complex about that. And then lastly, to talk about faith and how to let go and trust that there is a plan and that things will turn out. And so, with no further ado for me, turn it over to you, Reverend Barber. For those of us that are wrestling with anger, with depression, with doubt, with a crisis of faith in the country, how should we process all of this?
Well, first of all, Steve, thank you so much for having Jonathan and I. And the name of your show is really how we should deal with the warning. My father was also a World War II veteran, and he went in when the army and the armed forces was segregated. But despite the segregation, and despite the fact that he was drafted, and some say to give first class blood for second class citizenship, he knew the deeper meaning and the possibility and the hope of this country if she leaned into what she had said on paper about establishing justice, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and ensuring domestic tranquility and equal protection under the law. And nobody had the authority to deny or abridge the right to vote. And so he went in the Navy, drafted. By the time before the war was over, there was some desegregation of his armed forces. And he went in angry, Steve. He went in angry. But let me say a word theologically about anger. The scriptures, the prophets of the Bible were all angry at injustice. They were angry when they saw people being beaten and betrayed. Listen to these words. For instance, Isaiah, woe unto you who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights. That doesn't sound like somebody that's happy. or cry loud and spare not, blow your shofar, tell the nation of your sins, or Jeremiah saying, that my head was a fountain of tears that I might weep and cry on behalf of the nation. Or Jeremiah saying, I said I wasn't going to talk anymore about the things of God, but the word is like fire shut up in my bone. Or Jesus, the first day of Holy Week on Monday, turns over the tables in the temple, says that something's wrong here when the place where people are supposed to come for hope and peace has been turned into a den of thieves. And Paul says to us, be angry and sin not. Now, what that means is anger comes from and grief. If you're not grieving right now at what you see happening, if you don't grieve and have a sense of grief and anger when every day a president, for instance, and and the majority in the Congress get up and say, let's figure out how we can knock 36 million people off of health care, off of Medicaid, which we know will cost people their lives. If something doesn't bother you deep down, as Dr. King said one time, you ought to have what did he call it? Anger against injustice, an inherent and an inexhaustible anger. You should never be satisfied. Never be satisfied. Now, what we don't want to be is mad in the sense where we're going mad, or we're going to lose our minds, or we're going to start using violence and tearing up things. But anger at injustice, anger at wrong, anger at hate itself, hating the sin, finding a way to love the sinner is very, very, very much a part of what moral dissent is. How can you be smiling when 800 people are dying a day from poverty and we could stop it? How can you be silent when folk are saying no to just raising the minimum wage and raising the minimum wage to a living wage when and it hadn't been done since 2009 when CEOs are making 300 and 400 times more? How can you not be angry and bothered and maladjusted? That's King's word, maladjusted, when you actually see the Constitution being violated, not some, but every day by the administrator. When you see people being picked up and taken abroad and put in other jail.
Uh-oh.
Frustration. I'm angry. But the question is, what do you do with that anger? What do you do with it? That becomes the greater question.
Bishop Barber, we've lost your image.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it back.
th-
I just think I think somehow it got twisted around, but you all stay with it, and I'm gonna get right back
I'll
going.
John,
tell a quick story while he flips that around. Um, this is absolutely true that, in some ways we would be losing our humanity if we weren't angry. But people who aren't used to being angry have to learn where to find the spiritual resources to deal with it. So there was a young white man who went down to Ebenezer Baptist Church to do his ministry internship with Dr. King when he was in seminary, and he came into the church one day after having been harassed on the street by white folks who were mad at him for working with these black folks for civil rights, and he didn't have any experience of being attacked and harassed and yelled at in that way. So he went into Dr. King's office and he said, "How in the world do you deal with this?" And Dr. King's secretary, as the story is told, was asking at the moment for him to take the phone for a call from the Justice Department. But he said, "No, wait a minute. I need to talk to this young man." And he said he looked at him and he said, "You have to reach down on the inside and find the internal resources that make it possible for you to tap in to the deepest of who you are, because that's both the source of the grief that Bishop Barber is talking about, but that's also where we're going to find the strength to come together and to build the kind of community that gives hope." So I think we need to remember the lessons of folks like that too.
And Steve, can I make one point? When Rosa Parks sat down, remember what caused her to sit down on that bus? People had sat down before her in Montgomery. She had gotten great hope In 1954, the Brown decision had happened. Plessy versus Ferguson was overturned after nearly 60 years of fighting. But then, in the midst of that, Emmett Till gets killed in kind of a reaction to the Brown decision. And then his killers get acquitted. And contrary to often how we present Rosa as this nice little sweet little lady, Rosa Parks investigated rapes of Black women before she ever sat down that bus. She did not, she was very bothered by, grieving, if you will, by what happened. And when she saw what happened to Emmett Till and they got acquitted, she then got with some women. They sent her to Highlander, and she knew that she had to reach way down, as Jonathan said, to resources that would allow her to stand up to the system that was destroying people. And that's the difference between righteous indignation, righteous anger, and unrighteous madness when you just lose it. Because when you have righteous anger, the one thing you don't want to become is, if you will, your adversary or your enemy. You don't want to become like them. You want to be different. But what you don't want to do is dismiss the anger. Lastly, when you see, people talking about in the midst of the hard time, we're going to take $2 trillion and just give it away back to, as the Pope called, market forces, which never have delivered hope for everybody. Or we're going to attack voting rights and lie and suggest that there's flaw in that. To not be angry, and I'm gonna tell you where for me it is. When I see my mother one day, I went home. She's 90-some years old. My mother helped desegregate schools down in eastern North Carolina. And she said to me, son, I know you're 60-some years old now. She said, but I never thought I would have a son or a child that would have to fight the battles I thought we already won. And she cried, and what I call it is the one tear cry. There's in Black communities, sometimes women talk about they cry one tear out of one side of their face. That means they are greatly disturbed. That means they are bothered and upset and angry. And she cried that one tear, and then she looked at me and said, I never wanted or thought you would have to fight, but you better fight. What you better not do in this moment is sit down and dismiss it and act like it's okay and say, well, I've made it and other folks just gonna have to get along the best way they can. This is the actual wrong season not to have the kind of righteous indignation and anger that the Bible talks about, which is necessary and will force you to reach down and say, what do I do with this? What do I do with this to change the situation? Because if we're angry, Steve, imagine what the people are who are losing their health care. Imagine what the people are that got to figure out tonight, do I sleep in the car tonight or do I buy some medicine or some milk? If we're angry, imagine where they are. And what we don't want to see is a country that turns to madness, because the energy is going to go somewhere. It's going somewhere. And so this is the very moment that we need a moral movement that says to folk, we do have guidelines and compasses for what we do in moments of history where anger is a necessary part, just like truth and justice and crying and tears. And this is one of those moments that we have to transform our anger into deep, righteous action that seeks to change what is going on.
When I'm walking these beaches in Normandy or standing in the Canadian cemetery, and you see the graves, I went and stood on the spot in Neshoba County, Mississippi, where the 3 civil rights workers were murdered in 1963.
Mm-hmm.
And these people, American martyrs all, gave their lives. People who didn't have much, not like Elon Musk in the way of material things, but gave everything they had and more for the most ephemeral concept,
Mm-hmm.
freedom, dignity, to live life in God's image. And when you ponder that sacrifice and you think about this moment, your Substack is called This Moral Moment, and it is a moral moment. And I think that when we talk about politics, there's an allergy on the part of a lot of politicians, particularly Democratic politicians, to combine politics and morality overtly. And I don't see how we get out of this unless it is framed as fundamentally what it is, which is a moral crisis and a moral fight between right and wrong, and that seeing that clearly is of the highest importance. And so, for example, when a Democratic governor says, well, Mr. Garcia, who has been sold to an El Salvadoran gulag, to a dictator, is the wrong fight at the wrong time, my response to that, not as a spiritual leader, not as a moral leader, but as a political strategist, is that could not be more wrong.
That's right.
Is that sometimes the fights we must fight and the time we must fight them are not chosen by us, but by others. But it does not alleviate the necessity of the fight. And so I just like to hear you both talk about this exact moment in time through that prism of the moral moment. And let me just say that one of the most important things, we have almost 2,000 people on, and many more will see it in the aftermath. If you are not subscribing yet to Reverend Barber, Bishop Barber, and to Minister Jonathan's Moral Moment Substack, please do so. These are two of the most important voices. We'll get more into this in this country, in this moment, right now. And so, one of the things about Bishop Barber, one of the things about Jonathan, when you think about all of the great things that they have done, I don't have a doubt in my mind what in that book of records that chronicles what we did in our time here, what these men will be most remembered for is a lifetime of service to others, but acutely in this moment of crisis. And so these are exceptional men coming into this exceptional moment. I feel, I know, in a profound way. And that's why I want all of you to follow them. But I just ask you, Bishop Barber, can you talk about the moral moment as you see it?
You know, Stephen, I think that for you to raise what a governor said, not the Democratic governor said about the wrong fight, actually portrays the moral shallowness and weakness that we must overcome. Benjamin Franklin actually said that it would be better for 100 guilty men to go free than for one innocent person to be found guilty. In our system where the Constitution is designed to protect the minority in the real sense. Like, for instance, it doesn't require 50 people's constitutional right to be violated for it to be wrong. If one person's right is violated, they can go to court. They can challenge the violation on constitutional ground. Why is that? Because something called precedent. If you start allowing a president and his gang to just lift people off the street, to admit that they picked up somebody innocent and to send them away, and there's no moral outcry, then you open up the door for that to become precedent. And the question becomes, who's next? What we're wrestling with, Steve, and it's not even an issue of being political versus moral or religious. Nobody has argued, Jonathan and I have not argued, that everybody has to be Christian or a particular faith. However, we say in this country that many of our laws are rooted in Judeo-Christian traditions. But when we mean moral movement, we mean a place even where people who may not have a particular religious faith, but they believe deeply in the moral foundations that were written on paper in this country, even when the men that wrote them were not living up to them. I often say one of the great things about those back then is they wrote into the process amendments that you could change. And maybe it's because they recognized that they were flawed in the way in which they were following the very things they wrote, but they wanted to give succeeding generations the ability not to stay there. So for instance, in the Declaration of Independence, it actually said, Steve, that when there's been a long train of abuses, it is the duty, D-U-T-Y, of of people to change that system of government, to throw it off when there's been abuse out. And so, in a real sense, what we're saying to folk is when you swear, when you're a politician, you put your hand on that Bible and you swear to uphold the Constitution. What you're really saying is every piece of policy that I support will meet these basic standards. Number one, does it establish justice, or is it just for a few? Two, does it provide for the common defense of all? Three, does it promote the general welfare? Four, does it bring the community peace or disunity? Five, does it represent equal protection under the law? And if that policy doesn't meet those basic moral principles, then it is wanting. It is of being constitutional. It's flawed. It's a matter of right versus wrong. When Cory Booker said that the other day in his Senate speech, he actually was lifting something that we've been saying in our movement since Repairs of the Breach was founded all the way back to the moral movement in North Carolina. When we said to folk, they said, but you don't have to vote. It's another group in majority. We said, that has nothing to do with moral dissent, who's in the majority. Because if the majority is not following its own oath, then that majority must be challenged. I'll give you one quick example. In North Carolina, when Black and white people came together in 1868 to rewrite the Constitution in a way that moved us away from the vestiges of slavery and discrimination to a more just society, they guaranteed, Steve, public education as a fundamental right in the state of North Carolina, that every legislature had to ensure that every child, at that time was male child, but later on, every child had a quality education, a sound basic. So when we sued that, we found not all 100 counties, but a number of counties where that was not happening. And the courts agreed, because what they said was, you cannot swear to uphold that, and then when you get in office, cut all the money to public education. Cut all the money. You can't do it. It's contrary. It's wrong. And so today, we have to have a moral movement. When you have people saying, and the MAGA movement, and you've got these this gang of billionaires, they call themselves the dark mafia, or you've got people now talking about apocalyptic fascism. You know, fascism that wants to live, a form of running government that literally wants to say things are ending and then end it. In other words, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. You say, and you want to do this regardless of who it hurts, as long as a few people survive. People are talking about they want free cities where a certain, it's not we the people, it's us few, not we, just us few. Those are dangerous, immoral categories. It's dangerous, immoral ways of talking about leading a country, and they must be challenged. This is a moment. Lastly, whether you believe in the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, that you need to be a part of bending it. If you're a person of faith and your faith tells you that those in power, politicians, as my book tells me in Matthew 25, it says that every nation, Steve, not individual, it's not about individual piety, every nation will be judged by these four critiques. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was an immigrant, did you welcome me? When I was in prison, did you come? See, and when I was sick, did you visit me and have healed me? How you treat the least of these is a judgment on a nation. And we've had these battles in America before, time and time again. And there are moments like ending slavery. There are moments like women's suffrage. There are moments like when you need a new deal. There are moments throughout the American process when the only thing that got us out was when, say, for instance, Kennedy or Johnson would give a speech and say, fundamentally, this is a moral issue. Or Roosevelt would say something like, only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Or any corporation that doesn't pay people a basic living wage has no right to really exist and work in America. Or Teddy Roosevelt, when he broke with both parties in 1912 and gave his bull speech and said that there are just some fundamental things, protecting the environment, long-term care for our senior citizens, paying a basic minimum wage. He said those issues were not Democrat or Republican. It really was about right versus wrong. We must have a massive movement of people, clergy, rabbis, imams, people of faith, people not of faith who believe in the moral universe, to say what we are seeing right now is just wrong. It's just wrong. And it's not just wrong in terms of feeling wrong. It's wrong because it's deadly. It's hurting people. It's political violence. It's social violence. It's policy violence. And I feel like Frederick Douglass, when he said something, because this critique has to be rooted in love. And this is what Frederick Douglass said. When he was asked one time, what did he think about slaveholder religion that justified slavery, tried to make that which is wrong right, which we see happening today with the so-called religious nationalism. Frederick Douglass said, because I love the peaceable, pure, just, and truth-telling religion of Jesus, I must hate the lying, man-stealing, destructive religion of the slave master. You cannot love one without hating the other.
Hmm.
There are ideals. It's not about being against one person. It's about what's being promoted. And you cannot be for freedom and liberty on the one hand, and then be for tyrancy and abuse of the law on the other. The two can't exist equal. They're not two equal existing moral positions. One is wrong and one is right.
Steve,
Yeah.
one of the gifts of our life is that we get to teach public theology to our students at Yale Divinity School, and when we do, we look at these moral movements in the history of the United States. And Reverend Barber mentioned a few of them. I mean, there was the fight against the claim that you could own other human beings. There was the fight for labor rights, fight for women's suffrage, the civil and human rights of the mid 20th century. And in all of these movements, when we look closely at where the moral authority came from, it, at the heart of it, it's that people who were directly impacted by these injustices stood up, right? I mean, we always need all kinds of leaders, but the moral authority at the root of these movements are, women like Fannie Lou Hamer, who says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I know this from my own experience. And so in this moment, I think it's critical in the movement building that we're trying to do, that we listen closely to, who are the people who are being directly impacted. I mean, the moral voice that's ringing out about this neighbor of ours who has been disappeared to the prison you mentioned in El Salvador is his wife and kids and their neighbors who are crying out and saying, we know that God hears our cry. We know that this is wrong, and we're inviting our neighbors to join us in this. I think that's the kind of voices we need at the heart of a moral movement.
Steve, may I mention one piece that Jonathan just
Of course.
There is this scripture in the ancient Hebrew text, and I want your listeners today to hear the sound of it because it is applicable. The prophet looks at the nation, and he sees how people are using. He says, we must loose the bands of wickedness. That's the language. But in Hebrew, when you translate that, it means pay people what they deserve. In other words, to refuse to pay people what they deserve in the ancient prophet's mind was a form of wickedness. To greed was a form of wickedness. But then earlier, he's looking at the unholy alliance of some people, some corrupted people in the religious order, and the politicians, or the princes, if you will, as they say. And he says this word, woe. Now, woe, W-O-E, anytime you see that, I come from the country, Steve, where that's what you said to a stubborn mule. Whoa, stop. So the fact that the prophet says, woe, to the whole nation, woe. And then he says, to those who legislate evil. Now, that's not my word. These are words straight out of scripture. Who legislate evil and rob the poor, P-O-O-R, of their rights, and make women and children, P-R-E-Y, prey. If you listen at that imagery, it is saying whenever politicians use their power, not to uplift people, but they get caught up in some kind of mythology that convinces them the right use of power is to get up every morning and figure out who you can hurt, particularly those on the margins. That is a form of wickedness, is a form of evil, and it must be challenged, both in hopes that the people doing it will be redeemed and changed and see the error of their way, but to stop what is going on. And so in our movement, we think there are four movements. First, in a moment like this, you must have what we call moral analysis. What's really going on? So we get the best think tanks and people to examine. Right now, we have a piece called The High Moral Calling of this budget, the high moral cost of this budget. And we went inside of it and looked at these numbers and how devastating it will be. One of the footnotes is 24 million children, not black children, but white, 24 million children losing access to free and reduced lunch. We looked at if you cut Medicaid the way it's going to have to be cut, what it will do to rural hospitals, what it will do in Appalachia and in the Delta of Mississippi. Then you have to have moral analysis. Then after you have moral analysis, you have to have what we call moral articulation. How do you make that persons understand what's going on? Because a lot of times, so much is done with so much cover up. The Pope, before he died, said, isn't it strange that if Wall Street goes down, it's a headline story. But if somebody is sleeping in their car having to decide how they're going to feed their family, but they also work every day, but they work at such a low wage, they can't afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment, how is that not a headline story? These are the contradictions. So how do we articulate? How do we get the voice, not of people speaking for people, but people, as John said, themselves, which is the greatest moral force. Then the third thing is moral agenda. No anger at injustice is sufficient if you don't offer a replacement. If you don't offer, you can't just curse the darkness. You have to say there is something better. There's a way better. This is what the better way would look like. But then finally, you have to take moral action. Now, your listeners may not know this, but on Ash Wednesday, we took about 400 clergy and impacted people into the rotunda. Into the Capitol, not as a insurrection, but as a resurrection, and delivered to them this study called the High Moral Code. Do you all really realize what you're doing? Every member, all 500, some of them, and we delivered it to both the Speaker of the House and the opposition parties, leaders, so forth. And then they gathered in the rotunda. I didn't go in deliberately on Ash Wednesday. Do you know, Steve, that when they got in the rotunda and they were asked by one of the officers, what do you all plan to do? And they said, we plan to bow our heads and pray. The officer told them the new rules are, if you bow your head in prayer, it will be seen as an act of violation and aggression. In a country that says we have the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech, you tell clergy who were in full vestments, by the way, Steve, robes, crosses, to let people know, prayer shawls for our Jewish brothers and sisters. If you just bow your head, when we have gone to that level, at that depth, we cannot refuse to take action, nonviolent action, whatever it takes to put our bodies on the line in such a way that our bodies speak and say to folk, this is wrong and it doesn't have to be. And it will only be if we be quiet and we don't say anything. Because the only way a king gets to be a king is if the people bow to it.
Reverend Barber, do you plan to go back to Washington, to the Capitol Rotunda, and bow your head and face possible arrest?
Well, I tell you what I'm planning to do. On this coming Monday, we have called for clergy all over the country and impacted people to join us for the beginning of Moral Monday in D.C. We're going on this fourth Monday, and then every first Monday of the month, and it may escalate bigger, but we're going to start with the first Monday. It will happen. We were on the call last night with hundreds of clergy and impacted people. And we're going this particular Monday to deliver to every member of the Congress what the budget will do to workers and children. Because the process of nonviolence is you have to make sure that the persons you're standing against know exactly why you're doing it. We do intend to go in full vestment. We do intend to go in the rotunda like any other visitor. And I will have to, for various reasons, leave it at. We never go to get arrested. We never do anything to get arrested. But what we will do at times is we cannot say yes to something that is contrary to both our promises of our faith and promises of our democracy. So I'm going with others who are coming, but we're not. It's not a spectacle one time, Steve. We're launching Moral Monday in D.C. and folk can go to breachrepairs.org and learn all about it. And we've got a lot of other partners and denominational leaders that are joining us and impacted people that are joining.
Does the clergy that you're going with generally agree that it is important to be able to, if they choose, bow their head and pray under the rotunda in the United States Capitol, as is their First Amendment right?
Oh, yeah. They all agree with that. And people have to make decisions because, we've been told some things about even what the new penalties, but it points out how far we've gone. Some say that penalty is up, can be up to now $500, 6 months in jail. But of course, all this stuff has to be challenged in court. But the reason they're bowing is because, and John, I hope you'll tell that story about another person who used to beg people to come to pray. Here, but why are we there? Why are we going investments? Because the situation is so bad. You know, we want to see Republicans and Democrats turn. I'm like you, Steve. I got very bothered 3 years ago when all Republicans and a group of 8 Democrats voted against 35 million Americans and said no to raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It was just ridiculous, considering the hurt and the pain that people are in. So why would clergy put on their vestments to make sure people know we're not there just as individuals, but we're doing ministry. We're giving the nation the pastoral care that it needs at this moment and the prophetic challenge that it needs at this moment. Why would they do that? Why would they? Because to do less than that, to say nothing, would be a form of religious malpractice, democratic malpractice. Now, I don't mean Democrats as a party, because right now, I think, Steve, you and I have talked about this. We're not just this is not just a crisis of political parties. This is a crisis of civilization. This is a crisis of humanity. If we claim that America has the greatest economic power in this world, the greatest military power, and the greatest implant on the planet, if this country goes that direction, where the main decision about policies we make is how a few will get more and how those who are trying to make it will get less. If that's the way that we go without any regret, without any resistance, what happens to the rest of civilization and society itself? This is a moral moment. This is a gut check moment for this country.
In
Jonathan,
any, I was just going to say quickly, in any movement, the point of direct action is to expose, right? To shine a light and help people see what's really happening. And for far too long, a political movement in this country has actually used Christianity. Sociologists call this Christian nationalism these days, but has tried to use Christianity to to really prop up extremism in politics. And what Bishop Barber was referencing is that the folks who were leading the Congress right now, many of them are tied to these Christian nationalist organizations that for years have invited their supporters to come to the rotunda. And a guy named David Barton has stood in there and told them stories he's largely made up about how this has been a kind of sacred space and that they need to be able to worship there and pray. But when people who disagree with them, people who challenge their abuse of power, want to come and pray, then all of a sudden religious freedom is out the window and there's the threat of arrest. So that's why we have to pray, because of course the prayers of the cries of people are being heard by pastors. They have to lift those to God, but we have to pray in public because it's an important part of our vocation to make those prayers known not only to God but to the people in power.
I had a conversation with you, Jonathan, that left an impression, and you talked about your devotion to the doctrine of nonviolence and talked about your commitment to it, talked about, if necessary, and it was not a frivolous comment, about laying down your life. And I see some of the comments rolling below, and there will be a moment that comes later this summer. I feel for sure, but it's coming. I can't tell you what day of the week, but there's going to be a moment when a mass of Americans are facing a mass of uniforms, and those uniforms will lower weapons at peaceful protesters on the orders of the state. I don't have a doubt in my mind about that. And the question is, for those who will be in the front row, close to the barrels of the rifle. And I know that you will proverbially, in any instance, be one of those people. I think about John Lewis, and we think about the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and you go to the Edmund Pettus Bridge and walk across it in a group or walk across it alone. When John Lewis did it with peaceful people, they were walking into the devil's teeth. They were walking into death, and they faced it. And John Lewis almost lost his life there that day. He did not. But when we think about what's coming, how do you model courage for people arc of the that is that mine or yours? Is saying it's mine. That the moral arc of the universe is long, and we would have agreed with that, right? And it bends towards justice. To what Bishop Barber's mom said. To what Bishop Barber's mom said about. I understand that I was frozen, so I'll try to get this out clearly. What Bishop Barber's mom said at 91, which is that I just never thought that you'd have to refight this fight, right? This idea that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And now all of that is in doubt. What do you say to people who are afraid, who sense that the stakes are high, who are looking to find their courage in this moment? And what I tell people is that, there's an old definition of courage. It's not about not being afraid. Uh, it's about recognizing there's something more important than your fear,
Mm-hmm.
right? That helps you take that step off the first line.
Yeah. Yeah. John Lewis, who you mentioned, was a student of Jim Lawson. Bishop Barber and I are also students of Jim Lawson. There are many people who've learned the tradition of nonviolence in this country know that the commitment to meet violence with nonviolence is ultimately
We have
rooted in
some frozen guests here. I hope that I am not frozen right now.
You're coming through on mine. Can you hear me?
Okay, I got you back, Jonathan.
Can you hear me?
I got you, Bishop. There we go.
I was saying that the conviction that nonviolence is the right response to violence is a conviction that it's actually more powerful, that it taps into the fundamental reality of who we are and what truth is in the world. And what people who practice that know is that there is inside, all of us, things that will make us want to turn away. And so we have to train ourselves, and we have to be part of a community that's committed to this kind of. It's not that individuals are going to rise up in some sort of heroic effort. The sit-in movement was led by people who had practiced, who had with people who they knew and trusted, had practiced playing the roles of the people who would knock you off the stool, and rather than get up and fight back, who would sit back and continue to focus on the goal, not just of staying there, but of ultimately transforming the people who were committing the violence against them. And I think that hope that even people who have been deeply twisted and and really removed from their humanity by evil and by evil systems can in fact be redeemed, because at the root and heart of every one of us is a humanity that was stamped onto us by our Creator, and no matter how depraved we might be, we don't lose that. I think that's the core conviction of nonviolence, and so we need to be in communities where we're spending time getting to know that humanity of one another and practicing how we might use the power of nonviolence to resist the evil that's going to happen. Because I'll say this, the administration and autocratic regimes like the one we're dealing with right now, they want violence. They want there to be a violent response in public so that they can use that to justify the militarization of police and even putting troops on the ground in the United States. They would very much like that, and it's our job as a movement to prepare the kind of discipline that will be needed in order to use nonviolence to expose their violence so that everyone can see it for what it is.
Boy, that's a powerful word you just said there that I'm going to steal from you and repeat back, but a disciplined movement, a disciplined opposition, a fierce opposition, a moral opposition that is fierce and disciplined and American is something to be reckoned with.
And Steve, a disciplined movement that's rooted in the greatest power in the universe. Scripture says, perfect love casts out fear. So the opposite of courage is not fear. It's the absence of what do you really love? What's worse? What? In other words, when you consider your life and while you're here with others, what is it that you love so much that's so important, not just to you, but to those around you, that you're willing to stand up for? That so the discipline of the movement, people didn't just go out and just start doing nonviolence. There's processes to it. And not only that, they knew what they were fighting for, right? They also looked backwards to go forwards. The Sankofa bird flies forward looking backwards. So for instance, right now, and this may sound to some people strange, but we have to stop saying this is the worst moment we've ever seen, because it's insulting to people that come from people who stayed hopeful through 250 years of slavery, and the indigenous people in this country who saw their lands and things robbed and taken away. Is bad, but in a real sense, we need right now people need to be looking at those who had to make decisions, whether it's William Lloyd Garrison, who was an abolitionist, white abolitionist, who said when he was in jail on one occasion, William Lloyd Garrison was placed in this jail for preaching the damnable gospel that all men are created equal. I mean, he wrote that on so there's a sense in which we have to know who we are. We talk about Lewis, but we have to remember that 40 years before John Lewis ever came to Selma, Black and white and Jewish people in Selma had been standing and fighting for voting rights. And one of the reasons John Lewis got hit so hard that day is because he was helping Miss Boynton, who lived to be some 99 years old, who was a teacher and all, but she was hit on that day, what we call Bloody Sunday. And what also made Bloody Sunday so powerful is that the movement operated in such a way that Bloody Sunday didn't happen outside of the eyes of the camera. One of my professors said to me in history, he asked us, why did the segregation signs come down? And we were young, we'd always say, because people marched instead of. He said, no. We said, yes, it is. No, that's not the only reason. He said, part of the strategy was to embarrass the leadership of the greedy, mean-spirited leadership of America on the world stage, because America would often go to other countries and chastise them. But when the world saw in America people having dogs turned on them and their rights being violated, it caused a form of global embarrassment and forced a new conversation and consideration about who we are, what we're doing, and why things have to shift. So I believe, like you, I think there are two possibilities. The one possibility is that folk can just get angry and go off and just do any and everything, which could be very, very detrimental. And as Jonathan said, is what they want.
What Trump wants.
What Trump wants. The other is discipline, strong, courageous, fierce, studied movement with a clear demand, clear articulation, letting people know we're not just fighting an individual. Because in a sense, if one individual, let's just say, was impeached and put out of office, I know that would not stop what's happening now. It would not stop the level in which MAGA and the extremist forces. So we have to be very clear about what is going on and what we're fighting. But I do agree with you, and that the constant, what they call the 100 days of thunder and attacking of people is not going to serve to discourage people. It's actually going to serve to embolden people. And one of the things Howard Thurman said that we need to hear right now, he said, study very clearly the tools and the energy and the effort and the strategies that your adversary has to use, or they think they have to use, to defeat you. And therein you'll find your strength. In other words, if you have to do all of this, you got to cheat in elections, you have to shut down justice departments, you have to try to take over the, if you think about all the things they're attempting to do, that also says how strong the forces of justice are if we come together, if we mold together. Right now in this country, the interesting thing, Steve, is that the very people that will be hurt the most by, say, the economic policies of extremism, which are poor and low wealth, is actually the same group where you have the greatest possibility to expand the electorate that could fundamentally shift the outcomes of election.
Bishop, we're coming up on the hour, and I do want to, before I let you go, I cannot let you go before you tell 3,300 people with us and many more who will watch later the story that I have shared a couple times now, but I heard it from you. And it's the story of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman in the aftermath of Frederick Douglass's depression, in the aftermath of the Dred Scott decision. And when Harriet Tubman sees the depression in her friend and she says, Frederick, is God dead? I would love for you to share that. Before I do, turn it over to Bishop Barber. I want to thank Jonathan, Minister Jonathan. I want to thank Bishop Barber. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. One of the things I want to say about Bishop Barber and Jonathan, they're also brilliant political strategists who are deeply in touch with the people in the country. And when we next get together, we're going to talk about the strategy of building a black-white coalition in all 50 states of Americans of good faith, people of deep faith, people of no faith at all, in a great moral moment into a force that is going to make this country better. And so when you think about why things happen and the links of events that none of us can see clearly because they haven't happened yet, and where we have to wrestle with our doubt in our faith and confront our fear, we have to appreciate that we're not alone and that the greatest people that we revere through history walked in that doubt and walked in that fear and walked in those moments just like we are in their own time and in their own way. And so, if I could get you to tell that story, Bishop Barber, I know it will inspire many thousands of people tonight, like it did me. And then we'll have you all back soon. And we're working on some things together that we'll share with all of you soon. But understand uh, the aggressor always has the advantage of the first mover in any type of fight. The moral side of the fight is always the peaceful side of the fight. And so that side always has to react off of its back foot to aggression. But now that the fight is joined and you take full stock, everybody, the destruction of Elon Musk's companies that have resulted from his aggressions, the kowtow that Donald Trump has made this night in defeat to the Chinese with his trade war, it is not the case that Donald Trump is winning. No clear-eyed analysis would support that conclusion. The clear-eyed analysis supports the conclusion that suffering and damage and amorality that was all unnecessary is coming. And we're going to have to lift up a lot of people. But I feel that the overall outcome of this fight has never been in doubt.
That's right.
The consequences of it are in doubt. But if I could turn it over to you, Bishop, and what an honor it is to be with both of you tonight, two of the finest men this country has in it. Thank you both.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for your tremendous voice and clarity. I'm going to do like you and steal that last part from you about the outcome is never in doubt, but the consequences. And we must work to make sure that the consequences are less than they would be if we don't stand up and challenge. Less because we stood up, because the consequences will be deep. We're not just trying to get back to normal either, just get back to where we were before this election, because even going into this, 87 million people were uninsured or underinsured. 140 million people were poor and or low wage in this country. And I won't go through all the numbers, but they are numbers that say to us, we have work to do, not just to stop what is happening, but to also to climb to a higher and a deeper, higher place, and to lift all humanity, not just some. This is not just about stopping a moment in history and then leaving things as they are. Frederick Douglass knew that. Born a slave, escaped from slavery. And in and around the 1850s, a decision was made to challenge the rights, the fundamental rights of Black people, just the right itself. Does a Black person even have the right under the law for them to be respected? And there was a situation as it related to where people sat in the cars or trains. Dred Scott, a very bright-skinned man, chose to challenge what was happening and the separation that was happening to Black people. And they went to court. And the Supreme Court justice was an advocate of slavery. And so were most of the Supreme Court justices at that moment. And they decided basically that a Black man had no rights that the country or a white man ever had to respect. When Frederick Douglass got wind of this, along with the abolition movement, they were floored. This is 11 years, 12 years before the Civil War. 9 years. They were floored. They basically said, this Supreme Court has said, we have no legs to stand on. And he went into a funk, a crisis of existence. What would have happened to all of his work? What would have happened? What would happen to the abolitionists' work? And the story is told that he's in Pennsylvania, I think, Philadelphia. And Sojourner Truth actually sees him sitting somewhere with his head in his hands. This great orator, this lion, this man who learned how to read and was taught by some of the best people up in New Bedford, up in Massachusetts, and New Boston. And she screamed, the story says, across that room, "Frederick, is God dead?" That's the question. But she knew that for Frederick, God was the God of justice, of freedom, of transformation, of redemption, of resurrection. And that Frederick was having a crisis of faith, morality, and consciousness. He had to answer that question. And the answer to that question would determine what he would do. And Frederick knew at that moment that what he believed, the divine source of the universe, was eternal. It could not die. And that source was on the side of justice and love and truth and freedom. And it is said that he got up and contacted the Abolition Society, one of them, and said, "I need to speak in 2 or 3 weeks. Give me time." And he went and began to write and prepare a disciplined, fierce response to the Dred Scott decision. The story concludes by saying that when Frederick got up to do that speech, it was about an hour long. And interestingly, Steve, he takes the first 30 to 40 minutes and talks about how bad things are. He owns people's fear and people's struggles. And then toward the end, Frederick Douglass says, "But as monstrous as this decision is, and with all of the government seemingly against us, the judicial, the legislative, the executive against us, we can receive this decision with a cheerful spirit, because history is studied with proof that all efforts to allow the abolition and freedom movement in this country has only served to embolden and intensify its agitation." Could it be that the actions of this court is a necessary link in the chain of events to lead to the downfall of slavery itself? He reshaped his narrative and recommitted himself to the work of abolitionists along with other Black and white abolitionists throughout the country. Could it be, Steve? Could it be that this moment that we're seeing, all this gut check moment, is a necessary link? Because it's been there under the surface, but could it be that it's now all brought to the surface? So, and it may be a necessary link in a chain of events to wake everybody up, because this could be the moment that is the chain of events to bring down this kind of extremism, set people free from it, redeem people from it, and give America a fresh opportunity to seek to be a more perfect union and to have the third Reconstruction that we've so badly needed for so long.
Bishop Barber, Minister Jonathan, and all of you, thank you. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.